Welcome to Echelon Orchid. This is episode 125, The Phases of Leadership. On this episode, we're going to talk about the importance. Cut. 1, 2, 3, go. Welcome to Echelon Orchid. This is episode 125, The Phases of Leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking about the importance of mentoring. Why listening is a skill, are employees actually being heard, and how to develop connections with your employees. Joining for the discussion is TK Eppley and Ravi Bhatia. Please enjoy the show, and if you have time, go ahead and leave some feedback, positive or negative. I only ask you be specific. Again, please enjoy the show. Thank you, and take care. Okay. All right. TK, RB, welcome back. How are you all today?
Very well, sir.
Good morning. Thank you. How are you?
I am fantastic.
Wonderful.
All right, or at least trying to be. At least trying to be. Oh, how's the world treating you these days, RB?
Everything is going well. Busy, working, grateful. It's all good. Looking forward to an exciting spring and summer.
So what are you most grateful for right now?
You mean besides breathing?
Yeah, sure.
I'm grateful. I don't know. I guess I'm very optimistic. I'm grateful to work in such a great industry, and so construction there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in construction, a lot of opportunity. I'm also really enjoying teaching, especially a small class that I have. Really getting to connect with students, and I've given my students something that they're not used to, complete access. I say, you call me whenever you want, and I will pick up the phone. And some of them, one of them is a foreign student. He just came here from Africa, and he's new here. And he calls me sometimes. He'll call me on a Sunday, and he'll say, just want to talk to you. And I think he appreciates that. It's more than mentorship. It's like having somebody who they can ask about other things besides, schoolwork, and I think that's important. If you're going to be an instructor or in any kind of leadership or mentorship position, you got to be there for people and just listen. It's not that hard, really.
2 ears, 1 mouth.
I think for many people, it is hard for them to listen. I think they've lost this fine skill of listening.
Well, I think it comes back to the old statement: most people listen to respond, they don't listen to understand, right? And in relationships, whether they're interpersonal or work or just friendly relationships, and especially when they're personal, right? And a lot of work relationships become really personal just because you're trying to bond over a common thing, with a common problem to solve. You're going in the same direction. Is people start to defend their position, right? And in interpersonal relationships, they start to defend their emotions. And that blocks off a lot of the ability to be empathetic and listen to somebody and understand their point of view, because you're like, wait a second, I feel like I'm getting mistreated. I feel like I'm less than. And so it's even harder because it's a snowball, right? Because if you feel that somebody's not listening to understand you, then you're like, wait a second, now I got to respond to keep up. And you start this escalation of emotions, and largely driven by ego to a certain extent, but I'm not going to lose, right? And then that's when the things really come off the rails, and then it manifests itself in business really poorly, right? And that's where, we've talked about it before, as narcissistic leaders, they're immediately going after the response. They don't care to understand your point of view. They just want you to get back to doing things the way they want it done. And that's the ego-driven piece of it.
It's so toxic, right?
Yeah.
I think so much of our dysfunction in society as well as in business is when people are so locked in to their ideas and their egos that to them it's all about being right. I want to be right. Yeah. I don't want to win. I don't want to win the long game. I want to prove that I'm right. And there is a level of toxicity to that. And we've talked about this. There is some association, although we can't prove it, between narcissism and people who are just very Machiavellian about how they move ahead.
Yeah.
Those people that are Machiavellian, I almost feel like they're worse. Narcissists, I think it's pretty easy to kind of see, and at least it's kind of about them. But I feel like, at least in my, when I think of some people that are Machiavellian, like it's well, they're doing everything they can, and they don't care who they step on in order to get there, and they're not really transparent about it. They're the ones that are, I feel like, maybe, I don't know if you have different experiences, but they kind of go around your back and do things in order to sabotage you. Whereas the narcissist doesn't, at least I don't believe, they don't go and do those things. They'll just do it right in front of you.
Right.
So both
are bad
characteristics for leaders, and this article I thought was very, very succinct, right, about knowing where you are as a leader and being sort of inward looking, like, where am I as a leader? How do people perceive me? And that requires some thoughtfulness, I think.
Well, yeah. Sorry for the interruption, folks, but got to get ready to move everyone over to the YouTube platform. This is where the show will continue, and we will be starting back up in 30 seconds. Well, yeah, I believe that's the case. I mean, the article starts off with, there's 3 phases of leadership. You are appointed in some capacity, you got promoted for the manager for the first time. Now the phase 2, you're used to being a leader, you've been expanding, you're kind of sought after. And phase 3, you miss something. And I think that phase 3 happens probably a lot more often because of the same reason why, like, college football coaches don't do as well in the NFL, because they have to keep changing their message. At a certain point in time, maybe people are just no longer willing to hear the same message, and that could be because they failed to miss some times. Maybe they had some people that were too Machiavellian in the organization, but they've lost it a little bit, and then for whatever reason, they get over controlling. They might get toxic if it was an act. I think it could come. Well, I look at those things as going, wow, what a shame. You had someone that was energetic, doing things, and so what was that turning point for them?
I think your NFL analogy, I think it's different. I think it's, if a coach stays at one university too long, it's different in college, because every 4 years you have a new crop of players, so you can kind of recycle your message, right? And how I talk to an 18 or a 19-year-old college student and motivate them is different than a grown-ass man who, in most cases, is making demonstrably more than me, right? And that's where professional sports are an anomaly. Is the head coaches, managers in baseball, they're not making anywhere near what the players are making. Right. And so with that money comes a certain amount of, advocacy that they can have. And you either have, they don't want to listen to the coach, they'll go get another one. Right. Coaches in professional basketball are expendable, and they are, the primary sources of blame. Right. And a lot of times you look at a guy like Coach K, who just retired from Duke. He will tell you he's very hard on how he coaches up his college players. And when he first got the opportunity to coach the Olympic team for the 2008 Olympics, he knew he could not treat the players the same way, the NBA players. And he goes through this big story. Like he sat down with the players kind of individually. Like Kobe walks in, he's like, "Hey, whatever you want me to do, I'm willing to do. I'll guard the best guy on the other team, and I want to every night." To other players being like, "Yeah, just whatever, stay out of our way. We know how to play basketball." Right. And so and his ability to to modify I think this is the mark of a great leader. How I motivate one person isn't how I motivate another. You're all equal. You're not the same. Right.
That's
And
right.
I think especially when you get narcissism, they don't care about any of that. They don't care about anybody else's feelings. And they are like, hey, just go do what I tell you to do. I have the answers. Well, in most cases, those folks, people start voting with their feet, especially in a hot job market. Like right now, where, if you want a job, like go out and get one. They're everywhere. Right. Some companies are getting rid of people because of that now. Right? I'm not arguing whether that's right or wrong. I'm just saying, hey, if you're flexible in what you're willing to do to have a position, there's quite a bit of work there. Well, now people just vote with their feet. They're like, I'm not putting up with this person, right? And they don't have to, right? And I think that's the bigger difference. Is I think a good leader understands that hey, how I talk to Jim is not how I talk to Jane, right? Because they're two different people, and what's important to them to get them to the same goal is different. And so how am I bringing people to this nexus of performance as opposed to letting them all keep walking across their path where we don't actually get anywhere because we're going to walk by the objective because people are worried about themselves and not the goal.
That's an excellent point, TK. In all the years I've been working, just to have been a handful, maybe 2 or 3 leaders that I worked for who really understood this. And one of them in particular was amazing. He knew which button to press for every single person reporting to him. And it was a different button. For some people, it was pushing them hard. He was, but there was a common thread to all of it. He garnered respect from all his people because he worked really hard. He never threw people under the bus. He took responsibility for everything. And if he had something critical to say, he would sit down with you in private and say, hey, why don't we do it this way instead of, hey, you're really screwed up there. And he knew the button to press on me. And we were not that far apart in age. I think maybe a year tops. He knew that I didn't want to let him down because I had so much respect for him. And if he told me, hey, Ravi, I'm going to be traveling for a month, but when I get back, can you be ready with this, this, and this? And I knew I'm not going to let him down. It's just
3 weeks you were ready in case he showed up
ready.
early.
We would go to meetings, in Toronto from Rochester, and he'd show up at 7 a.m, and he knew that I was there at 4 a.m. getting ready for the meeting. I'd drive, he'd sit in the car, and then he would go through the entire cycle of what are we going to talk about with the customer? Are you prepared with this? What about this? What are all the operational issues?
Right.
And he knew that the team in the car would be ready because we would never want to let him down because we respected him, believe it or not, as a father figure. Like he was our coach, our mentor, our father figure.
And I think that father figure piece has nothing to do with age.
No, nothing.
Right. It's kind of like it's the aura people go for. It's not the perfect word for that, but it's how you feel about somebody when you walk into a room. Like you've walked into a room before, everybody has. And you walk into a group of peers, right? But you can tell who all the other CEOs genuflect to, who the A player is, right? And I was in an event, and my cardiologist was at this event, and there were other medical professionals there. And when I walked in, that was the guy they all deflected to. And I was like, hey, thank goodness he's my cardio because he's the A player, right? And that's the good thing you can see. The other thing is if you do have one of those just apex leaders, that you can start to tell who the narcissists are because they will break themselves off from the group individually. They're not going to go hang out with each other, but they're going to do this because they want to start to break that crowd up that's focusing on the A leader and drag them back towards themselves.
I think one thing great leaders can do, and you know more about this with your military background, is that the guy that I'm talking about, if he told me to put a blindfold on and jump off a building, I knew that he'd be there with a net.
Right. Well, it's a trust factor, right? And I think there's a concept of in the military, and again, Simon Sinek has co-opted this from the military. Leaders eat last, right? And I'll tell you, the Marines are good at it, but the group that I've seen that's the absolute best at it, and they take it to the nth degree, is the Ranger battalions, right? The privates eat, then the private first classes eat, then the corporals eat, and so on and so on and so forth. And it's a point of respect to get in your appropriate place in line. Right? One of the things they love when they get promoted is they move back in the line. right? It's a visible sign that you're now becoming a leader, right? So there's a lot of ways to grow leaders. Some of them are intrinsic. Some of, hey, I would say, like, when people they have like military, they have leadership class, like basic and advanced. Basically, you're giving people a roadmap of where all the services are. I've got somebody now that's in my charge, even though I might be an E4 and E5. I have somebody that's in my charge. Well, if they're having problems with their pay, where do they go? I should know that, right? It's things you don't know when you're a young guy, which is why you're asking somebody more senior to you. I think those are the types of things you get at the basic leadership classes. Because I think you can give people some tools, but people either naturally gravitate towards taking care of people, which is what being a leader is about, or they don't, right? And you can positionally make somebody a leader, in air quotes. That doesn't make them a leader. You can make somebody the boss. It doesn't make them a leader, right? And I think that's where and the military is different. If you think about it this way, when somebody graduates from college and they go into pick an industry, how many people are like, one of these days I want to be a CEO? Most 22, 23-year-olds don't have that in them. Like, they just want to go out, become a professional at what they're doing, and then hopefully, start to move up. And they might not even know what that moving up means yet, because they haven't been in that industry. They just know they love doing this technical thing. And how do I go from being a technical expert to, individual contributor, to start my path of leadership? And it might not interest some people, right? Well, if you take a young person when they get out, I'll use the Naval Academy as an example, but anybody that goes in as an officer, when those young men and women get out of the Naval Academy, for the 4 years, from the time they were 18 till the time they graduate at 22, they've been told every day of the week the future of the Navy is theirs. And everything they do is about the next step in their journey as a leader. They'll get out, they'll go to some school, they'll go to learn how to fly, they'll learn how to go drive a submarine, a ship, become a SEAL, go to intel school, but they're going to get they're going to get a branch that they're going to work in. It still doesn't absolve them of their holistic view of the Navy, and at some point the Navy's going to be yours. They'll get that, they'll go perform that job until about the 8 to 10 year mark. Then they're going to go to some professional education for a year. Then they're going to come back and they're going to do the first, they'll be promoted to 04, and they're going to be a leader. They'll be an executive officer. Then they'll be a commanding officer. In between there somewhere, they're going to go get a master's degree of some sort. And it's all leading towards the next level of professional education. I know one of the big ones that they push in the SEAL community for the officers is sending them to the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, because they want them to know how the money moves in the military, right? I mean, flat out, they want them to know how the money moves, right? And so all of those things lead to, by the time you're 20, 25 years in the military, you're a captain or you're a young admiral. Now, when you're a 1-star, they effectively are taking you for a ride to see if you have the gravitas and let your ego down. So now I'm an admiral. Now I have to learn how to behave. Now I'm in the C-suite of the company, so to speak, right? But everything from day one till the day you retire is about contemplating the next greater responsibility of leadership to take care of those other service members. And that happens service-wide, right? When I talk about teaching leadership or talking to folks about how to be better leaders, one of the things over the years I've had to do is peel away all the stuff that only inherently works in the military, because people are contracted to be there and they have an ID card and they have to listen, right? And so how you come out, there's a lot of empathetic things that happen in the military as far as leadership goes, but there's a lot of things like, hey, this is just the way it's done, right? Because we don't have time. Like, we have to maneuver. In industry and in enterprise, you've got to make that time, because you've got to create those bonds, create those relationships, and great leaders in the military do that. I've had young officers that became senior officers. I'd follow them anywhere, right? Because why? The positive experience about who they are. I had a young lieutenant, young 03 come in one time when I was a sergeant major overseas, and he walked in, he's like, "Hey, TK, what do I need to do?" Right? I'm friends with that guy today, right? Because he got it. Right, he understood the assignment, as the song goes, right? That's when you have the opportunity. There's positional leadership, and then there's emotional leadership. And what I always say is, like, the middle managers, like, they're the emotional leaders, because if you're doing this right, the senior leaders are going to come down because you're the technical expert. You got your hands on the people all day long, and they're going to be like, "Hey, where are we at with that?" Right? And I think the biggest impediment to somebody going from good to great in leadership is when they finally realize that everybody already knows they don't know all the answers. And once they realize that they don't know all the answers, everything works better, because now you can be transparent and you're not transactional anymore in what you're doing.
That takes so long to learn. And it certainly took me a long time to learn that when you're leading a project, and part of it is your training, right? Coming from a technical background, which most people do, you start with some technical knowledge, and you're always trained that you got to have the answers, right? Like that's what engineering school teaches you. You got to know how to solve a problem. But then you get into a management position and a leadership position, and you're just letting go of that and accepting the fact that, hey, I don't need to know all the answers. And now you get to a point where you say, look, I don't have all the answers, but I know that the people I work with collectively, that we are going to find the solutions.
Right. I'm to the point now where I wasn't joking around with my direct reports, but they were arguing about something, and I was like, look, they're asking me for the decision. I go, well, what do you guys decide? Well, what it was a tie. And so my job is to break ties. And I always say, we used to joke around when I was in the military, if you have a great idea, everybody can go home for the day. And we all stayed there all day long, right? Because you're always working on the next greater thing. And I think, there's a couple of things I agree with Bezos on. Where he's like, don't overthink it as a leader. Be strategic, be the person that's thinking 3 to 5 years ahead. In his case, that's a good number to be. It's different. That time arc is different depending on what business you're in. But when somebody says to him, hey, you guys had a great quarter, he's like, yeah, we baked that in 24 months ago.
Yeah.
Because I'm not even thinking about that anymore. But I think I've told the story on the show before, is when Dan and I were working together, we were trying to get a UX UI person to show up and really help us redesign some of the UX UI for the phone and for some of the other stuff we were doing. And the guy, he had designed the UX UI for the Kindle Fire and the Fire phone when it came out. And then he was off on another project, but he lived in the area, so we brought him in. I soon realized, I couldn't afford him when we got him, right? But I still wanted to hear his story, and I still wanted to let him, we dragged him in there. I wanted him to basically share what he could with us, right? And so I asked him about his experience working with Bezos. And he goes, I really enjoyed it. And he goes, why? Because the guy is no BS. Right? He doesn't hide his emotions and everything like that. And he goes, some people get worked up about that, but for me, that worked. And I go, give me an example. He goes, when we were trying to get the mapping, the 3D mapping now, that like when you push on the maps, it'll come up and it'll give you the 3D. He goes,
yeah.
That was first in the Kindle Fire phone, which is the best phone that never got sold. The best one that nobody bought. And they were having a problem trying to manifest that. And they're like, we don't think we can do it. And he's like, no, I know you can. He goes, why? He goes, because I hire really smart people, and you guys are it. And I believe in you to get it done. So just go do it. Stop worrying about what you can't do and go imagine what you can do. And he turns around and walks out of the room. A week later, they had a breakthrough, and the phone made it to market on time.
Oh, so I have a question for TK, for you, and for Dan. I like Ray Dalio. I like what he says. But then when I think about, in terms of ego and leadership, like how many CEOs could actually do what he does? This idea of radical transparency. He has taken data analytics to another level in terms of interacting with people and getting their ideas. And he it was sort of anecdotal, gave an example. Once he had a meeting, and his administrative assistant, I think, was there, somebody at a junior level. And after the meeting, she tells him, Ray, you're not on your A game. What happened? Are you okay? Like that was not a good performance. You do so much better. Like how many CEOs would accept that from somebody that works for them in that setting? Like, how could that, like that? And that's so important. And he really believes, he drinks that. It's not Kool-Aid. He actually says that radical transparency is what has made Bridgewater Capital number one.
I think very few will be able to do it. They believe, many people believe, by showing vulnerability that it's a weakness. By treating those like your admin as they are, an equal. Anyway, they have an equal voice, but I don't think many CEOs likely do this. It's that
1%,
when they speak, they expect everyone to just do what's told. And I think that's one of the big reasons why you're seeing, in many ways, a part of this whole great resignation aspect. It's that the employees don't believe their voices have been heard or being heard. Like if we're, a leader should not care, in 90% of the use cases, shouldn't care where you're getting your work done. You get to negotiate, so to speak, when it's going to get done, and then hold the people accountable. Let them own that win and see what happens. When you give people a little bit of authority, they don't tend to abuse it when when they feel that they are trusted. But I don't think many CEOs trust it. That's why you see, they're all come and saying that, look, you need to be back in the office. You need to be back. I mean, it's all you hear from the old guard CEOs, Eric Schmidt, Jamie Dimon. Everyone's got to be back in the office. You're losing this, you're losing that. And they don't think what is going on with the Gen Zers and the millennials, and that they've been building meaningful relationships with people that they've never met online for the last 15 years.
Yep. Since they were kids, right? I look at it as a different way, and it's experiential at this point, right? One of the great things about, and I can't speak to everything in the military, but I know this is true with aviators in the Navy, and I'm sure it's pilots in the Air Force as well, but and in the SEAL community. When we do anything, we have this thing called an after action report, right? And in most days, it's not a physically written down thing, right? I mean, if somebody gets hurt, there's certain paperwork that has to be done, but in general, you go out, you do a training event, even if you go out and you do a live event, and aviators are the same way. When you get done, everybody kind of metaphorically walks in the room, takes their rank off, and you sit around, and it's an honest discussion about what you did right, what you could do better, and if something was wrong, how did that go wrong based on our training tactics and procedures, right? And when I was a young SEAL, there was an old Vietnam guy, and he never used to talk about his platoon commander in terms of leadership. He goes, "Hey, my job was I was the stoner gunner, which was a machine gun back in the day." And then he goes, "He was the communicator. He was the corpsman." He goes, "He was the decider. He was just good at making decisions while we were out there." Right. So it wasn't in terms of rank. They had a respect for his ability to make decisions. Right. And we can sit across the table, and the boss will be like, "Hey, what do you think? We were out here, we did this. What do you think?" And some people go, "Well, that wasn't your best effort today, boss." Right. And they're like, "All right, well, how would you have changed that?" Right. And I know, like, when the Blue Angels, but not just training flights, but even after they do a show, there's another hour and a half, 2 hours after that, because they're going to sit around a table and they're going to go through everything that happened. Right. Now, some folks will tell you this is because, and I had a platoon commander say this to us. He goes, "Look, we all have an equal opportunity to die. So we all have an equal voice in how the success of this works out." Right. But again, it's transparency, because he said, "Look, there's going to be some days where I'm going to walk in here and I'm not going to ask you your opinion. I'm going to say, this is what we're going to do." He goes, "I'm never going to abuse it, but it will be if I've been told what to do, all right, which happens, right? Everybody's got a boss. And if I've already this thing," and he only did it once, right? And it was a very timely thing. We had to, it was like you had to get up and go. So we had to rely on everything we've been trained to do. And then we had to trust in each other, right? In the business world, you can get there. It's not hard, right? I have that relationship with the folks that I work with now, right? They know they can walk in my office and tell me anything. We goof on each other and like that. And I think a lot of leaders, a lot of bosses, so to speak, even mid-level management, they don't mind joking with the staff as long as the staff doesn't joke back with them, right? And that's vulnerability. And people associate weakness with vulnerability. Vulnerability is a skill, right? It's opening yourself to others, right? And saying, "I don't know everything." But like we've talked about before, how quickly can I give all my authority away to my direct reports so that they can give theirs away to their direct reports and down the line? Because that's how everybody feels like, wait a second, I've never been allowed to do this. My opinion is being heard in a way that's never been heard before. But you've got to be able and willing to have somebody come in and openly criticize you, right? And once it's open and transparent, and somebody says, "Hey, what's going on with you today? That wasn't your best effort." It's not because of ego or anything else. They're legitimately concerned about you because they understand that you're legitimately concerned about them.
Yeah, I think a lot of these CEOs forget, or actually they may have never even known that this equation exists, in that power has an inverse relationship with leadership. The more times I have to use my authority of my position in the hierarchy in order to get something done, the less effective of a leader I am over time.
That's right. If you have to tell people you're the leader, you already have
You're
lost.
not. You are not.
You've already lost.
If people guess when they walk into a room and you're in there, you're not it.
Yeah. And so they look at that power as if this was, again, the CEO of like Ford Motor Company when it was just a factory, right? It was, hey, like in the movie, Ford versus Ferrari, when he basically tells all of them, go walk home and come back on Monday with a good idea or pack up, because he didn't happen to like one particular thing or whatever was going on. I remember the exact stuff and it was going on in the movie at the time, but it was about the iron fist.
It's a little bit related to like Sun Tzu, Art of War. If you have to use your power, you got to use it in a way that you're going to win, right? If you overuse that power, then you're not going to win the war.
Yeah, you can go to the well with "we're doing it my way" every now and again, because I think if you've been transparent with folks and you've been empathetic and accountable with folks for yourself as well, that when you have to go there, people realize like, hey, he's got a boss, he's got a board, he's got to answer to, and he's probably saying, hey, we got to do this because we have to do it. But if that's your A game, it's not going to work. And statistics say that most people are going to start walking with their feet at about 18 months, or voting with their feet at about 18 months, right? And here's the bigger problem. And I've referenced the Stanford study where I say that a good majority of CEOs in Fortune 1000 companies are on the narcissistic scale to different levels, right? I mean, there's hey, I've got the job and I'm really impressed with myself, and I'm not going to listen to people for a while because they wouldn't have given me the job if I didn't know everything. And then there's Bondville and megalomaniac, right? So if you take somebody like a Corn Fairy, for example, and they're going to go recruit and find this guy. The guy's going to have multiple Ivy League degrees. He's going to have done this. He's going to solved every problem at every company he's ever been, right? That's just the way that works. And when they place this person, even if it's a company that's doing like 50 to 100 million a year, that guy base is probably going to be 700 to a million, right? Somewhere in there, right? So now Corn Fairy is going to, I think, is 2.5 to 3 times the base. I mean, I'll be a little bit off, and let's just use let's say 2.5 times. Well, now if at 18 months it's not working out, much like the NFL, if you got a real player, I got dead money on the cap. I don't want to, and so the board was like, oh man, and now they're like, hey, we made a bad decision. Well, they don't want to advertise that, right. And then they don't want to have it in the financials. That hey, what's this rando fee over here? Well, it's because this company says that, and we trusted them to do the right thing, right? And that's where people are allowed to linger, right? How many times does a mid-level person who's not performing, well, if you have it built right, their manager or whoever their direct supervisor is going to bring him in and go, hey, you're not getting it. We're going to help you get better because we hired you and we want you to stay here, but there's an end date that we have to have. We have to have a result by this time, right?
Right.
Sometimes that doesn't happen, right? And then people start talking behind other people's backs like, oh, Joe's not getting it done. Sally's like, oh, we thought she was going to do this. And now they start with HR strategizing how you can get them on a plan to get rid of them. Right. Well, nobody does that with the CEO. Right. You have to blast CEOs and board members out of there sometimes in very difficult ways because they're like, wait a second, I'm not leaving. Well, then the board has to take out, and it becomes this really bad situation for everybody. I think there's ways that people are contemplating now that kind of fundamentally change HR to kind of mitigate some of that. But I think everything they're talking about is going to start at that low to mid-level of management, and it's going to take a while to percolate up to the top.
What is the future role of HR and data analytics? Tying in, how does that tie into leadership and what we know about leadership? And given the greater power of the new generation of knowledge workers that are coming out, how does HR play into this?
Dan?
Well, it really gets, many people. So we had this whole aspect of human resources, and we started talking about it being human capital. They keep rebranding it. I think a lot of what I see wrong in this human resources, departments winds up being that they don't want to spend enough time on the psychology and sociology of the teams that are being put in place. Everyone that I've ever spoken with, for the most part, looks at this individual, this resume, this performance, and they just change things from weaknesses to opportunities, and haven't gotten into that strength aspect. But I'm going to go back to that psychology and sociology piece for a moment, because if a company is not being innovative, then they're basically dying, right? We've seen it with, pick the company, Kodak, BlackBerry. At least they had an opportunity to reinvent themselves. Blockbuster, not buying Netflix for $50 million. They all have it. So you need that positive conflict, that healthy conflict. And so when you look at the sociology of the teams and all those people and how they're going to interact with each other, you need to make sure you've got some, that diversity of thought that we talk about quite a bit. I don't think many HR departments look at that. You take whatever personality test type things you want, but I'm not really talking about a Briggs-Myers. I'm talking about how people actually think and get things done. I've spent a lot of time in the Michigan model of leadership, specifically on how to focus on innovation and how they look at things. HR is going to have to start moving in that direction and fast, because things, companies, especially in today's society, if you're not innovative and innovating faster, you're going to eventually lose out. So I think they need to evolve into almost being more like psychologists and sociologists, but from a performance perspective. They need to start acting more like executive coaches, time management coaches.
Here's a loaded question. Can you teach innovation to people, A, and to organizations, B?
I think yes to both.
That's good.
Yeah, I don't think you're basically teaching them innovation. You're basically saying, hey, I want you to be a thinker, and I don't want you to be a company drone. And so you're fostering a culture where question asking is thinking, hey, well, why are we doing it this way? All right, that's the first key. That's the first question to innovation. Why do we do this way?
I would only slightly alter that a little bit. So think about this. When you were 3 years old, you were the fastest person. You were the best superhero. You were the best artist. You didn't have that fear of being critiqued or things. You just did things. You made things up. You came up with your own ways to, here's a toy gun, a stick became, you had that imagination. And so TK, you've talked about like when NASA went in front of Congress, like when we had the rocket, right? The Apollo 1, we couldn't imagine that could be done.
Right.
So if we get people to go back and
actually most failures in life are because we lack imagination.
A 3-year-old doesn't lack that imagination.
Right.
I really like this. I like where this is going, because
but it's the old thing, like
it's so clear.
Every kid's born a genius, and we dumb it out of them, right? There's not one kid that shows up on the planet that's a racist, right? There's anything like that, right? Those are all learned behavior.
So we beat innovation out of people. There's a very interesting book.
You know why though, and how?
How do we beat it out of them?
The public education system.
Correct.
The public education system, for those people that want to read into it, that we have today, was largely transformed at the turn of the 20th century because Carnegie and Rockefeller in particular needed an ass load of workers. And there was no compulsory education in America prior to that. And so those folks that went and learned, they learned the classics, they learned mathematics, they learned how to be great thinkers and the great orators and great politicians of the next generation. And the megalomaniacal, what would be the tech oligarchs, what we call tech oligarchs today, those were the big players. And so they did the Carnegie endowments and Rockefeller endowments, and they started to drive what was taught in schools. And what was taught in schools where they were teaching people to be good workers. I don't need innovation for you to be a good worker. A couple of people are going to percolate to the top and come from another idea, but 80 to 90% of what I need worker beats. All right. And so if you look at it now, it's one of the reasons I will say I will never hire a 4.0 student ever. Don't come to me if you're a 4.0 student, because all you did your whole life was learn how to fit in the box and get along to go along. And it doesn't matter whether you went to some community college or whether you went to one of the what you consider to be the best university in the world. All you are is a person that just wants to go along to get along. You're not going to have an innovative bone in your body.
You know who says this? So Peter Thiel in From Zero to One talks about how our society we train people to move up the hierarchy of education to conform,
Right.
and we reward the lawyers and the investment bankers to basically move money around and not innovate, and they get rewarded for just moving the chess pieces. But it's rare when we find entrepreneurs who are actually creating something amazing for society, creating jobs. That's a rare thing.
Why do you think that whether it's certain Congress people, right, whether it's Senator Warren, AOC, or others, or the business community, even the media to a certain extent, they revile Elon Musk? Right? Because everything he's done, he even said, like when he talks about Tesla, he goes, yeah, we expected it to fail. And they're like, well, why did you start the business then? He's like, because what we wanted to do was change the narrative that an electric car had to look clunky. It had to be a sacrifice, right? This whole thing with green energy, right? We are on a great glide slope as U.S. It's the least talked about thing on the planet Earth, right? We are at the forefront of removing carbon from a thing. The problem is we live in an interconnected Earth that has a jet stream, and while we're never going to build another coal-fired power plant because we've legislated it out, which I thought was a great idea, China and India are building them like they're never going to be, like they're going out of style right now, right? Mm-hmm. And so the interconnectivity of it all is really what matters. And so we're on this slope right here. What the climate alarmists would advocate is we do this. This financially destroys the country.
Right. So there's got to be a balance there. And you're right. The opportunities for us in our society with clean energy, they're going to create so many jobs, millions of jobs, really disruptive, but at the same time, transformative for our society.
But right now, everything, it's funny, in American politics, to do anything different, everybody talks about, oh, we got to sacrifice this, we got to sacrifice that. Well, guess what? We're the only country on earth that can feed, clothe, power ourselves natively, right? But we're not doing it. Why? Because in modern politics, in my opinion, is if you talk about pain and suffering to get to nirvana, that's what people want you to do. Not like, hey, we're going to be responsible. We stopped using coal. We're getting away from other fossil fuels. Hey, natural gas is cleaner. Bring nuclear back into the discussion, and then we're on our way to wind farms and sun and everything else. Exactly. Just think about it. What if you put 2008 photovoltaics on your roof as opposed to putting 2022? It's not just the ability to capture energy is much greater. Where's the storage technology that was 2008 as opposed to today? Right? We can marketably say that, but in most cases, when people show up and they're like, hey, I'm doing this because I think some difference, like, hey, no, you're disrupting what we're doing, right? And now there's, it's not just political, but it's sociological that, hey, to make these great changes, we're going to have to suffer. Well, no, we have to change, right? And this giving up on whole sectors of available cheap energy just so that we can have this pie in the sky thing. It's not fiscally.
Personally, I don't know why we gave up on nuclear. Nuclear is clean energy. I mean, the way I look at it. I mean,
hey, the cautionary tale is Germany, right? Germany was energy independent with nuclear. France still is, but they gave up on it, and now they're dependent on the Russians for natural gas and energy. And shocker that the former chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schroeder, is the board chairman of the company that sells energy to Germany.
Surprise,
right? And nobody in Germany is like looking around and going, how did this happen?
So Germany just announced that they're now making a big push to go away from fossil fuels, but they are really in trouble, giving up on nuclear. And fortunately for France, they didn't. Right? France is powered, I don't know, 70%, 80% by nuclear, but Germany is so dependent on imported energy. Unlike us here in the U.S., we are energy independent, but Germany is not. And they're really in trouble with this.
Oh no, it's you think about, you listen to some elected officials and they want to put us in the same boat that Germany's in. It's like, hey, we're giving up on everything to go to zero emission energy, which I don't not advocate for that.
Right.
I just say, look, there's a path we have to get to. Thinking, it's like one of the greatest lines I've ever heard by a leader was one of the Indian leaders a few years ago when they were talking about, the Paris Climate Accord, and he goes, wait a second, you're going to tell me, specifically talking to the U.S. and the U.S. politicians, you're going to tell me that at the turn of the 20th century, you belched more crap into the air to become the industrial the mightiest industrial nation on the earth, and now you're going to say nobody else gets that opportunity. Right. And I'd like to argue with you, but I can't. Right. Because I'd be a hypocrite then. Right. And I think that's the bigger problem. Again, that comes back to listening to understand, not listening to respond. And everybody, when you get in that public domain, I think it's one of the savage things about the 24-hour news cycle is everybody has to be able to respond. Right. We're not contemplative about anything anymore. Like when you look back into the 60s and earlier, even the 70s, if you ask a politician a question or a thing, they had time to curate it because the news was on, morning. Nobody really asked about it. Really, it was about the evening news.
Yeah, 7 o'clock
or
news.
Evening news, or it was about newspapers. And so the time for long form curated thought to solve problems led to better outcomes, right? Because, and I would say this, like you look at two great examples of when Reagan was in office, he finally realized he wasn't going to get reelected in '83 unless he changed something. Well, Tip O'Neill figured, hey, we're going to lose the House if we don't change something. So they worked together to pass legislation that led to a great economic expansion. Mm-hmm. Fast forward again into the 90s, we were having a little bit of, not recession, but there was a little downturn. And President Clinton realized, I'm not going to get reelected if I don't do something. And Newt Gingrich is like, I'm just the new Speaker of the House, and I don't want to give that up. So they worked together to solve problems, right? Now, one was right before 24-hour day news, and one was shortly after that, right? Because we were still learning how to consume news at a 24-hour period because the original Gulf War had just happened.
Right.
And that brought that CNN into that 24-hour news model into existence. You can't do that today, right? You can, but people aren't doing that, right? It's like, how quickly do I get in Congress? We take the one picture of all the freshmen, and then we separate them into their party groups. And it's about getting wins for the party. It's not about getting wins for the nation. And anybody that wants to disagree with Matt, we can bring him on and we can talk about that, because that's how this happens. And that happens in organizations, right? You have the leader of the company. He has a vision, right? Well, that vision gets co-opted by the people down, and everybody starts to grab their little fiefdoms. And the bigger the company, the bigger this happens, because you can't see everything every day. I have a small company. I know everybody. I know every person. That's my biggest fear, is getting to the point where I don't know everybody. I don't mean I'm afraid of it. I think it's a good problem to have, because it means we're growing, we're doing the right things. But at some point, it's like, I like having my hand on the people piece, right? That if somebody gets sick or something like that, we can do the right thing. I don't have to go to the HR man. I know what the right thing is to do. And the HR process serves me to say, hey, how do I financially do this correctly? It's not that I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to take no for an answer, or I will not take no for an answer. How do I correctly financially do this? I don't need a 150-page manual to cycle through, right? When you get into these really big, like the Amazons of the world that hire 330 some odd people a day, right? They need to live off the HR manual to a certain extent, because you have a massive group of people that you're trying to control. Right? I don't mean hands-on control. It has to have an organizational structure, and that is most largely fed through the HR manual. Right. And we can argue about whether that's positive or negative, but that ends up being, the joke at Amazon is people walk around with their laptops in one hand and an HR manual in the other.
Yeah, and going back to that aspect of teaching people about innovation, RB, I think there was this, I only ever saw a few episodes of this, and it was called Undercover Boss, right? Where the CEO has to go in and talk to the people. What we generally find is that those on the front lines of whatever it is you're doing, they know a better way to do it, but that's been, as we talked about, beaten out of them to raise a hand. And this is where Toyota wound up doing it quite well when it came to that manufacturing aspect. That aspect of Six Sigma, lean, value stream mapping, things of that nature, helps us to ensure that we don't just keep doing the same thing over and over again when a better way comes about. And too many just say, every time I've raised my hand to say, I think we could do this better, someone slapped them because they've gone too much into this well, this is what the manual says, and therefore this is what we're going to do. We're going to die on this sword, and they don't ever want to retake a look at it. I think more CEOs should go and talk to the people on the front line and see what they have to say, because those people are more likely to have a better idea as to what's going on than you are all the way at the top.
Well, so Ratan Tata, right? Great industrial, well-respected global icon of industry. When he bought, I guess, Land Rover and Jaguar, and he came to the U.S. He visited every dealership in the U.S. and he wanted to make a personal connection with every single dealer and the people. And he did that, and it probably took him a long time, many months to do that. And by doing that, what he told him was like, this guy really cares about his people, right? And I think that for leaders, you can't really fake that. You can dance around it, but it's very hard to fake that. And TK, to your point, I agree that it all starts with our education system. I got a sobering lesson many years ago as an undergrad, and I asked somebody who knew. I said, "What are we doing here? Like the entire engineering curriculum. What's the purpose?" And he said the purpose. A lot of what we were doing was really to create the workforce for the factories, to run the industrial complex and the military industrial complex. And so in a way, it was sort of like Orwellian, right? Like you're really being trained to be automatons, not to think.
And you think about people that fight that paradigm, right? Like I've said it before, if they graduated college at all, the average billionaire's GPA is 2.9.
That's right.
I'm not advocating that people when they go to school strive for a 2.9 because you're going to be a billionaire. I'm just saying that people that have that vision, right, that you can't, even somebody like Gary Vee, who the guy cracks me up when I see him on social media, because I think the way he tells his message is extremely engaging, right? But they asked him, like, did you fail in school? Did school fail you? He goes, no, school fails entrepreneurs every day, because they're not building schools to teach people entrepreneurial skills.
They actually don't. And I had in business school, I had a professor who said that the PhDs are the people that are going to be making very little money, and we're going to be teaching you guys. He said the MBAs are going to be the automatons, running everything and managing things and thinking they're bosses. And he said the ones that barely got out of with their undergrad degree, they're going to be creating industry.
Right, because while they were busy getting a 2930, they were thinking about other things that were extraneous. I mean, even ask yourself this question when we start talking about how we get people to be more innovative and less autocratic. Why don't we teach basic financial literacy in every public school as a requirement? We require 4 years of English, right? There's a big joke every April, right? When on IRS day, it's like, hey, I'm glad I learned trigonometry, because trigonometry season every year when it comes up, I really need to know how to do that, right? And and again, I think that's a social strata thing as well, because if your parents are upper middle class and are engaged in saving and everything else, they're most likely going to pass that along to their children. What an IRA is, what saving, how to fill out a check, do a checkbook and everything like that. And if you want to change the fortune of people that don't imagine it, you have to show them how $50 a month at 18 for the rest of your life can change your life. Right? Hey, it doesn't take much, but when you're 18, start investing $50 a month and see how it will change your life. And prove that out to them and show them, because is 401k the right answer? I don't know. Social Security is definitely not the right answer. What you're dependent on, right? And I was talking to a congressman a couple of years ago, and they were talking. Somebody mentioned about the lottery, and all these Congress people that were standing around started laughing. Like, that's just the way we get tax money from the half of the people that don't pay taxes in this country. Just think about it. They've said over the years that all that lottery money was going to pay for public schools. If that's the fact, and it actually is happening, why isn't every public school in America cathedral of higher learning? Why is that not, like, I don't have to be the smartest guy on earth.
It's a feel good story. Right? Hey, it makes you feel good to say, hey, I'm spending this dollar, whatever it is, for whichever lottery that it's going to be, and all this stuff's going to go towards schools. It makes people feel good. Oh, well, sure, we should pass this law.
But
It rarely does it. It does for like the first year.
We've been doing lotteries since the late 80s in this country, or mid 80s, but yet there's been no system.
Where did the money go? And now the next question is, now you have online gambling in New York State. It just got passed. 51% of sports betting on online, all these different apps that are out there, 51%, New York State's going to take that money. You think that money is going to get spent really wisely?
Well, no. Well, I mean, that's all.
They haven't yet. So,
but that's all subjective, right? There's other groups of people that are sitting, talking around their camera, or talking around their table right now that are happy with the way some of this is being spent. Right? I might happen to disagree with them, and I think that's the bigger discussion is, hey, you were in anything that we do, and I think Americans have taken their eye off the ball. And think about it, with social media, how many distractors are there? Right? So that the left hand's not paying attention to the right hand. Right? But when you talk about the lottery, Dan, you're not talking about you and me and folks that, like, I don't buy a lottery ticket ever, but if it gets up to $900 million, you know what? Statistically, I'm not any less likely to lose or win the lottery than somebody that buys 100 tickets. Right? 1 in 235 million or whatever it is, right? So buy one. Yeah. Right. And understand it's blind luck and it's $1. But when you see folks in a 7-Eleven every Tuesday, Thursday, whatever the days are, and they've got a little portfolio and that's their thing, it makes sense.
The scratch offs and
Well, no, and they've got like the lotto. Well, the lottery commission, they have these little plastic binders that you can put all your lottery stuff in. So they're treating it like an investment. Right, because let's say, what do you do? I got on my phone. If I want to go on my filing cabinet and I want to look up my financial stuff or go online, they're treating it like an old school financial transaction. Well, it's not. Right? I've heard state assemblymen here called the lottery the redneck 401k.
Yeah.
Right? And all of that's very sad to me. Right? Because if you bring up teaching one class in financial literacy in public schools, they go mental.
Why?
I don't know. Why do we not want to teach our kids how the money system works? It's the same reason, this is TK's opinion, it's why we teach social studies now and not civics. Because if we don't teach the kids how the mechanisms of government were intended to work, anybody can stand up on the stage and say, hey, I got it, don't worry about it.
That was going to be my next question. Why don't we teach civics now? I remember taking a civics class right before we emigrated to the US, first grade in India, Catholic school.
Yep.
I had to take a course in civics as a first grader.
Okay.
I believe the answer to this question, and its answers for both why not financial literacy and why not civics, is because if you teach people how to do these things, then you have less control over them.
Correct.
All of this is about control. I look at it. Yeah, I look at this as I want everyone to know everything that I possibly know. Stand on the shoulders of giants. And this is where I go, at some point when I hopefully get the privilege of being CEO somewhere, as to why I want that most junior person in the organization to get better, because as they get better, I get better. And then if I get better, I get to teach them more things that get pushed down so they get better. And then eventually we all just keep rising up together.
It's, that's the number one way I gauge a leader is how much of themselves are they willing to give, right? Even if it's somebody that I'm working for, like, board members and stuff like that, when they come in and say, hey, we'd like you to do this. And I say, okay, I'm not opposed to that, but why in particular today and why do you want me to do it? I'm like, well, don't worry about it. We got a reason. We're the thing. Okay, no. You're being disingenuous now, right? Because in some cases, and not personally, but in some cases, people have done that just to hang out, put them out there to dry, so to speak. But again, it's if you're going to ask somebody to do something, you need to give them the breadth of your intent, right? And I think when I talk about transparency, it's always in the terms of the context of decision making. What is my context of decision making? Because if I can impart that on everyone, then they can make decisions for themselves and the organization that I might never even contemplate. Right. And you need to celebrate that stuff. I mean, we have folks come we have investors, potential clients and everything. There's not one of the investors said he was like, The word I never comes out of his mouth, right? Because you know what? I am a made guy. I'm not getting promoted anymore, right? I mean, it's the way this is, right? And so everyone else is making everything happen. I'm keeping the wheels in the cart somewhat financially and dealing with all the outside interference and helping to do sales to a certain extent. But the day-to-day of how we get better, how our airplanes get better and all that stuff, that's not, I tell people where I want to go. I don't tell them how to get there, right? And I give them a timeline. Hey, we got to have this done by a certain date. Is that possible? Right? Because as that innovator dreamer person where I'm like, hey, I want to start doing this on X. Well, if what I'm saying, if in my head is we can't do that in a certain time, I'm not helping the organization out by demanding that, right? Or hey, we can do that, but we need 3 more people,
right? It
makes back to that triangle: money, people, and time. If I want to collapse time, I need more money and more people. But there's a point where that doesn't work anymore because it's the old adage: at some point, you just can't put 9 women in a room and have a baby in a month.
Right.
Right. Some things have to curate in sequence, and you can't do them in parallel.
Right. The one thing I like to tell my folks in that here's the goals, and so here's a great way of this aspect. The goal is to get to California, and they should be trying to figure out the when. Now, the strategy is kind of the how. They could walk, they could ride a bike, take a car, take a bus, take a train, a plane. So all of those things get right back into it. More resources means I can get to California faster because I can take a plane. And so that's how I try to get them to start thinking in that manner. Hey, here's the goal. Now, what questions should you be asking to figure out how to deliver on that goal?
When?
Right. No, but that's, I mean, these are like, what we're not, I think, when we start talking about, especially the next generation of people, like what tools as a society can we give them? When, I talk about there's 2 types of citizens now. There's naturalized citizens who are required to understand everything about this government. And then there's accidents of birth, which are born here, and we try not to teach them anything. Right. At some point, we don't care that they understand. I mean, when you look at one of the textbooks years ago for history there was well over 100 factual errors in there, and it was like, what are they there for? Right. And those are when you start thinking about it. My biggest thing is like, where'd all the lottery money go? And why isn't every public school a cathedral and every teacher not making 150, 200 grand a year? Because in reality, I would submit that one of the most important functions, or the most important function of government, is to educate the next generation so that we don't have a society of dumbasses that are out there, right? It benefits us to do that, right? But you can't do it if you're not holding the education system accountable. And that's what the education system doesn't like. They're like, oh, we went to school for education, but you can't tell us how to do this. Yeah. Well, no, I think we can.
Well, right? Democracies work well when people are educated.
Yeah, and educated. Yeah, I can't remember who said it.
The Greeks taught us that, right?
An educated electorate makes a great society, right?
Right.
But again, we're not teaching financial literacy, and we don't teach people how. Yeah, I mean, my daughter's school thankfully teaches civics, and last year or 2 years ago, when the presidential election was, the teacher kind of moved the curriculum around so that they talked about the federal election, brought up the law. Here's the thing, and the kids were coming home going, none of this is correct. How they're doing this, none of this is legal, right? And that's a uninoculated and uninitiated group of 16, 17-year-olds that are just reading the laws, right? They're not watching the news, because God help you if a 16-year-old ever watches the news, right? But they're not. And it's like, if you take a group of people that are unknowing to how a system is being worked, and let them read the rules for how it works, you're going to find out more than you'll find out any other way.
Very true. Very true. Well, gentlemen, as always, it's a pleasure. I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
You as well, my friend.
Thank you.
And hope to see you all again real soon.
Have a great week.
Have a great week, everyone.
Take care.
Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it. Please subscribe. If you have any comments, please leave them in there. My guests and I are very interactive. Well, we want to be better, and hopefully you got something out of this. Until next time, take care. Thank you.